Who will replace Dave Calhoun as Boeing's next CEO, and what kind of a change will that person bring? In this video, I will first give you some historical background and then look at some possible CEO candidates. And I will also explain why the timing of this CEO swap might be a bit of a headache in itself. Stay tuned. I recently made a series about the history of Boeing and specifically about their merger with McDonnell Douglas, and in those videos I pointed out how that merger ended up shaping Boeing's future over the past 25 years, thanks to a stream of new Boeing CEOs that basically came straight from McDonnell Douglas. I also pointed out what a huge impact Jack Welch, the CEO strongman of General Electric, had on those Boeing CEOs, as well as the rest of the Boeing board. During the 80s and 90s, Jack Welch had completely transformed GE, at one point turning it into the most valuable company in the world. His career culminated in 1999 when Fortune magazine named him the Manager of the Century, a title that quite a few people probably would question today. During his reign, Welch had introduced some, let's say, interesting business ideas, like only keeping companies within the GE group if they ranked first or second in their industry in the world, and using that same principle with its own employees, something that got known as the rank and yank policy. That basically meant that each business unit had to rank its managers against each other and then fire the bottom performing 10%, even if those people did nothing wrong and their unit was fully successful. These types of business practices gave Welch the nickname Neutron Jack, which was a reference to the neutron bomb, a nuclear bomb that kills everyone within range without damaging many structures. And Welch apparently didn't appreciate this nickname. Surprise, surprise. Anyway, these ideas eventually made it into Boeing, particularly under CEOs like Harry Stonecipher and Jim McNerney, who were both Jack Welch prodigies. Remember, McNerney was the Boeing CEO who compared his own management style to Darth Vader? This new reality at Boeing contrasted sharply with the pre-McDonnell Douglas era, when Boeing's workers lived under the motto working together. Now, after the merger, managers and other employees instead suddenly found themselves competing with each other to avoid ending up in that dreaded bottom 10% and possibly lose their jobs. Obviously, this was an extreme change, and if you want to hear more about that, then check out my Boeing series. But something that I kind of skipped over in those videos was, well, what happened to General Electric? How well did Welch's legendary business acumen work out in his company? And the answer to that is not great. By constantly removing underperforming company divisions and managers, it meant that by 1989, GE had fired over 100,000 people. And not only that, the policy of only keeping business units that ranked first or second in their industry meant that Welch had to look at increasingly diverse industries to find new companies to replace them with. Eventually, this meant that GE ended up buying businesses that had very little to do with the company's existing activities in engineering-based fields. They ended getting into healthcare, investment banking, and even the entertainment world, and they even added an aircraft leasing arm, which at one point became the biggest in the world. At the same time as this was going on, GE's research budget severely suffered. Welch had previously encouraged managers to look for fresh ideas in other parts of the company, but this became really difficult when the company's activities became increasingly disconnected and irrelevant to each other. Now, at this point, I should make it really clear that not everyone agrees that Jack Welch was the Dark Emperor to McNerney's Darth Vader. Some analysts argue that even though these actions didn't translate well when applied to other companies, they still made sense for GE, at least initially. And that was because in the early 1980s, General Electric actually needed someone to strip it from decades worth of unnecessary internal bureaucracy and multi-tier management. Welch did this very successfully, and when he retired as CEO in 2000, General Electric still seemed financially sound, although some argue that changes in accounting and pension contributions helped hide the beginning of the company's real problems. In 2017, Welch's hand-chosen successor, Jeff Immelt, quit the company, which was by that time collapsing all around him. Not surprisingly, those who liked Welch said that it was unfair to blame him for a collapse that happened almost 17 years after his retirement, But ironically, shortly after retiring, Welch himself said in an interview that my success will be determined by how well my successor grows the company in the next 20 years. And obviously that quote didn't age very well. Now initially, GE had continued making questionable acquisitions under Jeff Immelt following Welch's example, but eventually the balloon burst and Immelt started divesting GE from its many divisions, something that his successors continued to do after his departure. And in April this year, GE officially stopped being a conglomerate of business units altogether. Today, what was left of the company has been split into 3 separate entities, one of which is GE Aerospace, who's making jet engines. Jack Welch passed away in 2020, still adamant that he had run GE well, aside from his choice of successor. Now the reason I've done this long introduction of Welch and GE is because, as some analysts have pointed out, the 3 Boeing CEOs that previously worked for Welch collectively spent 70 years absorbing that particular type of management mindset.
Jack always said the right things, always.
And more crucially, Welch might not have just shaped Boeing's management in the last 20 plus years. Depending on who takes over as Boeing CEO, his influence could still continue to have a future within Boeing, although I have a feeling that people outside of Boeing will try to put a stop to that. And I will explain what I mean by that and look at some potential Boeing CEO candidates after this. I often get the question, how is it possible for you to do all of the things that you do? You must be juggling millions of things at once, and it's true, but the secret lies in having the right kind of support behind you. That's where my wife, Sandra, and today's sponsor, BetterHelp, comes in. I've been sharing the benefits of BetterHelp with you for quite some time now, and when I finally made the decision to seek support, ensuring that I would be connecting with a highly qualified therapist was at the top of my priority list. As a pilot, I clearly understand the importance of rigorous training and qualifications, and just like how we must undergo extensive education, training and certification to be trusted with the lives of you guys, our passengers, it is crucial to have qualified professionals to guide us through the challenges that we face in our own personal lives. I chose BetterHelp because of how easy they make it to connect with a qualified professional therapist. Every single one of their therapists is licensed, has a master's or doctorate degree, and has spent over 3 years and 1,000 hours working with people just like me and you. All I had to do to sign up was to answer a few quick questions, and then they chose one that they felt was best suited to me. This is a lot easier than manually researching therapists in your area, trying to figure out what they specialize in, what their qualifications are, and whether they have availability that fits your schedule. To try them out, go to betterhelp.com/mentornow or choose Mentor Now during sign up to get matched with a therapist and receive a special discount of your first month of therapy. Thank you, BetterHelp. Now let's continue. When Dave Calhoun leaves Boeing, which should happen latest this coming December, he will take home some $33 million in bonuses. Now this is something that has raised quite a few eyebrows, since bonuses are normally awarded to someone who has met cost, production and other performance targets, which is a little bit questionable in this case. But on the other hand, Calhoun's predecessor, Dennis Muilenburg, got a severance pay of $62.2 million, even though he was fired in the aftermath of the 737 MAX crashes. These decisions are approved by Boeing's board of directors, which Calhoun will continue to be a part of after he leaves as CEO, as decided by a shareholder vote. Now obviously, it is also the Boeing board that will decide who the next CEO is going to be. Or is it? Well, here is where things start to get a little bit interesting, because technically, yes, this decision is up to Boeing's board of directors, but the reality is a bit more complicated than that. As I've mentioned in previous videos, neither Boeing nor Calhoun intended for the company to have a change of leadership this soon. That decision was basically taken for them by their airline customers in March this year as a direct consequence of the Alaska 737 MAX 9 blowout. As John Ostrower explained in great detail in The Air Current, the CEOs of United, Southwest, American, Alaska, and probably some others too, started to organize meetings with Boeing's board. And in those meetings, they didn't want to talk to neither Calhoun nor Stan Deal, who was then the Boeing commercial airplane CEO. Instead, they wanted to address the board directly, both about the accident and the effects that the looming aircraft delivery delays would have on their fleet. And the end result of this was the announcement that Calhoun would leave at the end of the year, along with Stan Deal's immediate departure from the company. Without the confidence of their main customers, it would have been really hard for them to drive the business. Larry Kellner, Boeing's chair of the board of directors, was also replaced, as he didn't stand for re-election during the shareholder meeting this May. Now, it's not unprecedented for outside players to force a company to make leadership changes, but Boeing was forced to oust their CEO, their commercial airplane CEO, and their board chair basically over a weekend, and this was the single biggest management shakeup in the company's history. This action by the airlines sent a crystal clear message. Not only are these airline bosses fed up with Boeing's overall situation, but they will now also likely take a really keen interest into who comes next into management. They are expecting to see real changes at Boeing now, and they likely won't simply accept any decision that the Boeing board might want to take. And that finally brings me to the first name of potential Boeing CEO candidates, Stephanie Pope. Pope is currently Boeing's Chief Operating Officer, a job that she's had since last December, and when Stan Deal was ousted as Boeing's commercial airplane CEO, she inherited that job as well. Before those positions, Pope was running Boeing's Global Services, or BGS, which is a part of Boeing that converts older passenger jets into freighters and also provides aftermarket support to airlines in general. Now, BGS was profitable when Pope was managing it, but unlike Boeing Commercial Aircraft or Boeing Defense, Boeing Global Services has been consistently profitable for many years at this point. Pope has been a very loyal employee and has over the last 30 years or so held a number of financial positions within the company. She was seen as a protege of Stan Deal, and Dave Calhoun has also recently expressed his support for her. Now, whilst that might have been a very big advantage for Pope just a few months ago, today things have likely changed quite a bit. Scott Hamilton in Leham News explained that Calhoun likely initially planned to retire in about 3 to 4 years, just before turning 70, and then possibly handing over the reins to Stephanie Pope. That timeline would have allowed her to remain as Boeing CEO for about a decade before turning 65, which would give Boeing a longer period of stability. But again, all this was before the Alaska 737 MAX 9 door blowout incident. Now, the impression from around the industry is that Boeing investors would prefer an outsider to step into the CEO role instead. The next candidate, Steve Mollenkopf, who is the current Boeing chairman, may have the same problem. However, unlike Pope, who has been with Boeing for 3 decades, Mollenkopf is a relatively recent face in the Boeing board, joining in 2020, and that might work in his advantage. Previously, he was the CEO of Qualcomm Incorporated from 2013 to 2021, where he had worked since 1994, previously as an electrical engineer. As a CEO, he had to handle a number of legal and trade challenges, which showed that he is also quite politically savvy, which would come in really handy here. Similarly, Dave Gitlin, a Boeing board member and the current CEO of Carrier Global, ticks a lot of similar boxes. He is relatively young, 54 years old, and he has enough energy and aerospace expertise to potentially successfully fill this role. Unfortunately though, he is busy in his role at Carrier and has publicly stated that he plans to stay there, but analysts continue thinking that he could be persuaded to change his mind. On the other hand, other experts like Richard Abulafia has commented that anybody who's been on the board for more than 1 or 2 years has some explaining to do, which is a testament to the suspicion the industry has towards the Boeing board and its historic General Electric influence. Now, the theory that Boeing's board will likely look for someone outside of Boeing is further supported by the fact that they have hired the executive search firm Russell Reynolds Associates Incorporated to help them in that process. And once we start to go outside of Boeing, some really interesting choices immediately pops up. Now remember that 3 of Boeing's CEOs were originally from General Electric, so how about a 4th one? One that actually served as a General Electric CEO. Now, I know that might sound like insanity given all of the things that I've already told you, but the one that I'm talking about is Larry Culp, the guy who straightened out GE and split it into those 3 units that exist today. At the moment, Culp is CEO of GE Aerospace, and he is regarded as a competent manager and a problem solver with a solid business background. Culp was the first external CEO of GE ever, which is a pretty amazing thing to hear considering that that company was founded already back in 1892. He is someone who can talk to the markets and who fits the role of a storyteller CEO, something that I recently pointed out would become crucial for Boeing during the coming decade. You see, whoever takes the job will have to both be able to unite the Boeing employees towards a future great goal and convince Wall Street to give them a few years of bad financial returns in order to turn the ship around, and that will not be easy. But the problem with Culp is that, like Gitlin, he has ruled himself out of the running because he still has work to do at GE Aerospace. Still, like with Gitlin, some analysts believe that he could potentially change his mind, so I wouldn't completely rule him out. And speaking of CEOs who are already busy mending troubled companies, another candidate is Pat Shanahan, currently the CEO of Spirit AeroSystems. Shanahan got this job at Spirit only last September, tasked with sorting out the quality issues at Boeing's biggest subcontractor. Now, he was also very quick to rule himself out of the running, saying that he has plenty of work left to do at Spirit. But as I'm sure that many regular viewers of this channel already knows, Boeing is actually in the process of acquiring Spirit, or at least the bits of Spirit who makes parts for Boeing aircraft. And according to John Ostrower, Boeing wants to finish that acquisition before their own change of CEO. After the merger, Shanahan could stay in on the same place as he is now, which would presumably be called Boeing Wichita, or he could possibly get another role within Boeing. Ostrower reports that Shanahan is already commuting weekly between Wichita and the Boeing assembly sites near Seattle, and that makes sense since Shanahan has a reputation of being a problem fixer and someone who really knows how to build airplanes. Technically, Shanahan is also a Boeing outsider, but not really. He last worked at Boeing in 2017 and he had then worked there all the time since 1986. In his previous role, he was involved in the development of the Boeing 777 and later became known as the Mr. Fix-It, working on just about every Boeing type produced in the intervening years. He reportedly played a big role in sorting out the 787 during its development delays, and by all accounts, he's doing some really good work over at Spirit in Wichita at the moment. But how could such a Boeing veteran be seen as an outsider then? Well, that's simply because he wasn't at Boeing during the years that saw the problematic development of the 737 MAX, or at least not in a management position close to it. Shanahan left Boeing to get a government job as first deputy, then acting Secretary of Defense until in May of 2019. Now, I'm spending so much time on Shanahan because some analysts consider him to be the front runner for the Boeing CEO job. But he could also be a candidate for the job as CEO of Boeing Commercial Airplanes, which also really needs a Mr. Fix-It, and a lot of airline CEOs have called for someone with actual production experience to take on that role, and that would be a great description of Shanahan. But another slightly off-the-topic idea that has been floating around in media recently is that Boeing could soon move their headquarters back to the Puget Sound, Boeing's traditional home. And Shanahan might be the kind of guy who would push to make that a reality, especially since he has his family there, and that could make him the first Seattle-based Boeing CEO in nearly 3 decades. Now, there are some other names that have also been suggested for the CEO position. Greg Smith, the current chairman of American Airlines, or Wes Bush, which is a former Northrop Grumman CEO. But age could be a little bit of a factor for many of those candidates, and that actually includes Shanahan. And that's because Boeing might decide that they want someone in that CEO role that could stay there for at least a decade to try and right the ship and provide a little bit of stability for the company. Another important detail here, which I alluded to a little bit in the beginning of the video, is the timing of the transition to this new CEO. Like I said earlier, Calhoun will relinquish his position in December at the latest, but for a lot of people in the industry, an even earlier date would be much better to get the rehabilitation of the company started. But there is a problem with this. You see, in September, a 10-year contract between Boeing and its union of machinists in Washington state expires. And as I explained in my Boeing series, the previous contract signed in 2014 saw the workers make some really painful concessions. Now, with Boeing backed into a corner with little or no negotiating powers, the workers are wildly expected to get a lot of those concessions back. And I think it's likely that Calhoun will stick around at least long enough to sign this new contract, to basically save the new CEO from having to sign a very one-sided new agreement. This should give the new CEO a better chance of looking successful from the start, and it should also give Boeing, Spirit AeroSystems and Airbus enough time to figure out a way to split Spirit up. Like I said earlier, Boeing really needs some stability right now, and for their people, suppliers and investors to understand that its recovery will likely take years. This will take a very strong CEO with the ability to understand the process, the market and the employees, and this person will also need to be bold, to look into the future and stay focused on the target, which is to get Boeing back to creating new, awesome, safe and successful aircraft. I know I highlighted Pat Shanahan in this video, partially because of his Mr. Fix-It reputation and engineering background. But don't assume that only an engineer could return Boeing to the right path. Boeing's most successful CEO ever was Bill Allen, a lawyer. And when the two 737 MAX crashes happened, Boeing's CEO was Dennis Muhlenberg, who was a trained engineer. And do you know who else was an engineer? General Electric's Jack Welch. No matter who ends up getting this job, returning Boeing to its former glory is going to be one of the toughest corporate turnarounds ever. So what do you think? Who would you think should run Boeing after Calhoun? These are exactly the kind of discussions I have with my patrons in our Zoom Hangouts, by the way. And if you want to join the next one and support the work that I do here, there's a link to join my Patreon crew down in the description or somewhere here on the screen. Have an absolutely fantastic day wherever you are, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.